Millionaire watched 98 lawyers fail to find the flaw in a 789ers contract, until an 8-year-old poor girl revealed a secret that left every lawyer speechless. What could it be? Before we share this sorrowful tale of solitude and pain, tell us where you're watching from and subscribe for more heartfelt stories. The mahogany conference room felt suffocating despite its vastness, the air thick with desperation and expensive cologne. 24-year-old Marcus Wellington sat at the head of the polished table that had once belonged to his grandfather, his fingers drumming an anxious rhythm against the surface as sweat beaded on his forehead despite the Arctic air conditioning. Around him, the finest legal minds money could buy shuffled through mountains of paperwork, their expensive suits wrinkled from 3 sleepless days of futile searching. "Mr. Wellington?" said Patricia Hayes, the lead attorney from Cromwell and Associates, her usually pristine appearance now disheveled, voice strained with exhaustion and barely contained frustration. "We've gone through this contract with electron microscopes. 98 of the best lawyers in the country have examined every clause, every semicolon, every piece of punctuation. The Blackstone Corporation merger deal is completely airtight." Marcus's jaw clenched so hard his teeth ached. $789 million, his entire inheritance from his late grandfather's revolutionary tech empire, hung in the balance like a sword of Damocles. Something about the Blackstone merger felt fundamentally wrong, like a splinter buried deep under his skin that he couldn't remove, no matter how much he tried to ignore the persistent, nagging sensation. "There has to be something," Marcus insisted, his voice rising with each word, echoing off the walls lined with portraits of Wellington Industries founders. "My grandfather didn't build this empire by trusting gut feelings alone, but he taught me never to ignore them completely either. He always said the devil hides in the details." The lawyers exchanged weary, patronizing glances that made Marcus's blood boil. Dr. Richardson from Harvard Law School cleared his throat pompously, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Marcus, we understand your emotional attachment to your grandfather's legacy, but sometimes intuition simply isn't enough in the legal world. The contract is not just legally sound, it's practically bulletproof." Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Manhattan office, storm clouds gathered like an ominous portent, casting dark shadows across the bustling streets 40 floors below. Marcus stood abruptly, his leather chair rolling backward and hitting the wall with a sharp thud that made several attorneys flinch. At 24, he'd already endured more loss than most people face in a lifetime. Both parents killed in a horrific car accident when he was just 16, leaving him alone with his grief and his grandfather's fierce protection. Then, 6 months ago, Grandpa Samuel had suffered a massive heart attack, leaving Marcus not just emotionally devastated, but also the sole heir to an empire he wasn't sure he was ready to manage. "One more day," Marcus said quietly, his voice carrying the authority he'd inherited along with the billions. "Give me exactly 24 hours before I sign anything." As the exhausted legal team filed out, muttering among themselves about stubborn young billionaires and impossible deadlines, Marcus remained alone in the massive room, staring at the contract that would either secure his family's future for generations or destroy everything the Wellington name had built over decades. What none of them knew was that tomorrow, a completely chance encounter with an extraordinary 8-year-old girl would change absolutely everything. The rain hammered against the windows of Lincoln Elementary School like angry fists, creating rivers that cascaded down the glass as 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez pressed her small face against the cold surface, watching other children disappear into warm cars with their waiting parents. Her stomach growled audibly. Lunch had been a single bruised apple she'd carefully saved from yesterday, wrapped in a paper napkin that was now soggy in her backpack. "Emma, honey, your mum's probably just running late again," said Mrs. Patterson, her third-grade teacher, though deep worry creased her kind face as she glanced at the clock showing 5:30. The school was nearly empty now, with only the custodian's distant humming echoing through the hallways, and even he would be leaving soon. Emma nodded bravely, trying to force a smile that didn't quite reach her dark eyes. She'd learned long ago not to complain, not to be a burden, not to add to her mother's already overwhelming stress. Mum worked 3 grueling jobs, cleaning corporate offices at dawn when the city was still sleeping, stocking shelves at Rodriguez Grocery during the bustling day shift, and serving tables at Mel's all-night diner until well past midnight when her feet were screaming in pain. Sometimes the city buses were late due to traffic or breakdowns. Sometimes cars refused to start in the cold. Sometimes life was just unforgivingly hard, and 8-year-old girls had to learn patience that most adults never master. "I can wait as long as needed," Emma whispered, settling back into the small plastic chair that had become her second home during these long, lonely afternoons when silence filled the classroom like a heavy blanket. Mrs. Patterson knelt beside her, studying the little girl's serious face with growing amazement. In 15 years of teaching, she'd never encountered a child quite like Emma Rodriguez. "You know, Emma, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, the way you notice tiny details that others completely miss, the way you can spot patterns in math problems before I even finish explaining them." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Have you ever seriously thought about becoming a lawyer when you grow up? You have exactly the kind of mind that could excel in that field." Emma's eyes lit up for the first time that day, sparkling with genuine excitement. "Really? Do you think I could actually do something that important?" Smart, observant girls like you can become absolutely anything they want in this world," Mrs. Patterson said gently, tucking a strand of Emma's dark hair behind her ear. "But it takes years of dedicated studying, excellent grades, and tremendous determination. Law school is incredibly challenging, even for brilliant students." The school's front door burst open with a bang, and Maria Rodriguez rushed in, her hair completely disheveled from the torrential rain, still wearing her wrinkled grocery store uniform, with its name tag hanging askew. Her eyes were red-rimmed with exhaustion and filled with tears of frustration and guilt. "Mia, I'm so incredibly sorry," she called out in accented English, her voice breaking with emotion. "The bus broke down completely, and I had to walk 12 long blocks in this terrible weather." Emma jumped up from her chair and ran straight into her mother's arms, breathing in the familiar, comforting scent of vanilla perfume, mixed with the honest smell of hard work and bone-deep exhaustion. As they hurried toward the bus stop, sharing Maria's thin jacket against the cold rain, Emma turned back to wave enthusiastically at Mrs. Patterson, who was watching them from the doorway with a mixture of admiration and concern. "I'm going to be a lawyer," Emma called out, her young voice echoing with determination in the empty hallway. Neither of them could have possibly imagined that in less than 18 hours, that seemingly impossible dream would take the most extraordinary turn imaginable. Marcus couldn't sleep, his mind churning like a restless ocean. At 2 a.m., he found himself wandering the empty streets of Manhattan, his expensive Italian leather shoes clicking against wet pavement as his thoughts circled endlessly around the contract details that seemed to mock him with their apparent perfection. The rain had finally stopped, but massive puddles reflected the neon signs like broken dreams scattered across the asphalt, creating an almost surreal landscape of light and shadow. His phone buzzed insistently, another urgent message from his assistant reminding him that Blackstone Corporation's final deadline was exactly 9 a.m. sharp. Sign the merger agreement or lose the deal forever, along with the quarterly profits that kept Wellington Industries competitive in the brutal tech market. The 98 lawyers had been absolutely clear about one thing. There was no legal way out of this binding commitment. But his grandfather's voice echoed persistently in his memory, as clear as if the old man were walking beside him. "Marcus, my boy, when something feels fundamentally wrong in your gut, keep digging relentlessly until you find out exactly why. Trust that instinct. It's saved me more times than I can count." He found himself standing outside Angelo's all-night diner, its warm yellow light spilling onto the sidewalk like a beacon of hope in the darkness. Through the rain-streaked window, he could see a small Hispanic woman methodically wiping down tables, moving with the efficient, practiced grace of someone who'd performed this exact routine thousands of times before. Marcus pushed through the heavy glass door, the old-fashioned bell jingling softly above his head. The woman, her name tag read Maria in faded letters, looked up with tired but genuinely kind eyes that reminded him somehow of his own mother's compassionate gaze. "Coffee, please," Marcus said quietly, sliding into a corner booth with cracked red vinyl that had probably been there since the 1970s. "And whatever you'd recommend." Maria poured the steaming coffee with remarkably steady hands, despite her obvious exhaustion. "The apple pie is completely homemade," she offered quietly, her accent adding a musical quality to her words. "Made it myself before my shift started, using my grandmother's secret recipe." As she served him with careful attention to every detail, Marcus noticed the genuine care in every gesture, the quiet dignity in her work despite the late hour, and the obvious bone-deep exhaustion that shadowed her movements. It reminded him powerfully of his grandfather, who'd started with absolutely nothing and built an empire through sheer determination, 18-hour workdays, and unwavering principles. "Do you have children?" Marcus asked gently, genuinely curious about this woman who radiated such strength. Maria's entire face brightened despite her tiredness, transformed by pure maternal love. "One daughter, Emma. She just turned 8 last month, and she's so incredibly smart it actually scares me sometimes. Her teacher says she wants to be a lawyer when she grows up." She laughed softly, but there was pride mixed with worry in her voice. Always asking endless questions, finding little things that others completely miss. Her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, says she has some kind of special gift. Something stirred powerfully in Marcus's chest, a strange, inexplicable certainty that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Where does she attend school?" "Lincoln Elementary, about 6 blocks east of here." Maria paused, studying his face with sudden curiosity and perhaps a hint of maternal protective instinct. "May I ask why you're interested?" Marcus carefully placed a crisp $100 bill on the table as a tip and stood to leave. "Just curious about exceptional children." "Thank you for the pie, Maria. It was absolutely perfect." As he walked away into the night, one consuming thought dominated his mind. He absolutely had to meet this remarkable little girl who found things others missed. Emma sat cross-legged in the quiet corner of Lincoln Elementary's small library the next morning, completely surrounded by towering stacks of picture books about lawyers, courts, and the American legal system. She'd arrived at school nearly an hour early, practically vibrating with excitement about Mrs. Patterson's encouraging words from the previous day, her mind racing with possibilities she'd never dared to imagine before. The ancient desktop computer in the corner hummed and wheezed like an old man as she carefully navigated websites about law, her small fingers pecking at the keyboard with determined precision. The words were often big and confusing, filled with Latin phrases and complex terminology, but Emma had always possessed an almost supernatural ability to figure things out through pure determination and careful observation. She grabbed a worn spiral notebook from her backpack and started copying down important-sounding phrases in her neat third-grade handwriting, occasionally pausing to sound out particularly challenging words. Contract law, finding errors and inconsistencies, attention to minute details. She whispered to herself, her pencil scratching steadily across the lined paper as she built her own personal legal dictionary. Mrs. Patterson discovered her there at exactly 8 o'clock, completely absorbed in her research with the intensity of a graduate student preparing for final examinations. "Emma, you're here remarkably early today. What's got you so focused?" "Mrs. Patterson, what exactly do lawyers do when they examine contracts?" Emma's dark eyes burned with intense curiosity and determination. "The computer says they look for loopholes and legal inconsistencies. But what does that actually mean in real life?" Mrs. Patterson sat down beside her, genuinely impressed by the child's dedication and the sophisticated nature of her questions. "Well, imagine a contract is like an incredibly complex puzzle, Emma. Lawyers have to make absolutely sure all the pieces fit together perfectly, with no gaps or contradictions. Sometimes there are hidden pieces that don't match the others, and if you find those mismatched pieces, it can completely change everything. Like when Tommy Martinez said he'd trade me his chocolate chip cookies for my apple," Emma said slowly, her face scrunching with concentration. "But then, after I gave him my apple on Wednesday, he said the trade was only valid on Tuesdays, but he never mentioned that rule until after he already had my apple." Mrs. Patterson's eyes widened with amazement. That's absolutely perfect, Emma. That's exactly what a loophole is. A hidden condition that changes everything." Emma's face illuminated with sudden understanding. "So lawyers are like detectives, but instead of solving crimes, they solve mysteries hidden in words and sentences." "You could definitely say that." Mrs. Patterson smiled with growing excitement. "Emma, you really do have an extraordinary gift for this kind of thinking." Neither of them noticed the well-dressed young man who had just entered the school's main office, speaking quietly but urgently with the principal about what he described as a very unusual but potentially important request, involving one of their most exceptional students. Marcus Wellington was about to make what would prove to be the most important decision of his entire life. Principal Margaret Johnson looked across her desk at Marcus Wellington with a mixture of genuine confusion and growing concern, her experienced educator's instincts immediately alert to the unusual nature of this unprecedented request. "Mr. Wellington, I certainly understand that you're facing an extremely significant business decision, but I'm honestly not sure how an 8-year-old student could possibly help with a legal matter involving hundreds of millions of dollars." Marcus leaned forward in the uncomfortable plastic chair designed for parent conferences, his expensive designer suit looking completely out of place in the modest office decorated with colorful children's artwork and motivational posters featuring cartoon animals encouraging academic success. "I realize exactly how this sounds, and I wouldn't be here if I weren't absolutely desperate. But I have very good reason to believe that Emma Rodriguez possesses an exceptional, perhaps even extraordinary ability to spot patterns and inconsistencies that others miss completely." "Even if that were somehow true," Principal Johnson said carefully, her protective instincts fully activated, "Emma comes from an extremely difficult economic situation. Her mother works multiple jobs just to keep basic food on their table and a roof over their heads. I absolutely will not allow this vulnerable child to be exploited for some wealthy businessman's entertainment or publicity stunt." "That's definitely not what this is about," Marcus said quickly, his voice carrying genuine sincerity. "Look, I want to be completely transparent about my intentions and my commitment. I'm willing to establish a full educational scholarship fund for Emma, private tutoring, the best schools, college preparation, law school if that's her dream, whether she helps me with this problem or not. But I'm genuinely desperate, and sometimes desperation forces you to consider possibilities that others would never even imagine." The principal studied him intently for several long moments, her experienced eyes searching for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. "You're absolutely serious about this educational commitment?" "Dead serious. My entire inheritance is hanging in the balance. 98 of the country's top lawyers have told me categorically that there's no legal way out of this contract, but something feels fundamentally wrong. If there's even the slightest chance that this remarkable little girl might see something they've all missed." A gentle knock interrupted their intense conversation. Mrs. Patterson peered through the partially open door, her face bright with excitement. "Excuse me, but Emma's in the library asking increasingly sophisticated questions about contract law and legal procedures. She's been researching intensively all morning with the focus of a law student." Marcus's pulse quickened noticeably. "Would it be possible for me to meet her just briefly?" Principal Johnson hesitated for a long moment, clearly weighing multiple factors. Finally, she sighed deeply. 5 minutes maximum, and Mrs. Patterson stays with us for the entire conversation. When Emma walked into the office a few minutes later, Marcus was immediately struck by the remarkable intelligence shining in her dark eyes and the careful, almost adult way she carried herself, like someone much older and wiser, trapped in a child's small body. "Emma," Principal Johnson said gently, "this is Mr. Wellington. He has some questions about contracts and legal matters, and we thought you might find it interesting and educational to talk with him." Emma looked up at Marcus with frank curiosity, and not a trace of shyness. "Are you a practicing lawyer?" "No," Marcus smiled, charmed by her direct approach. "But I'm hoping someone very smart and observant might help me understand something extremely important. Would you be willing to try?" The conference room at Wellington Industries buzzed with barely contained tension and disbelief as Marcus returned from Lincoln Elementary with his unlikely companion. Emma Rodriguez sat wide-eyed in a massive leather chair that completely dwarfed her small frame, clutching a juice box and peanut butter sandwich that Maria had carefully packed for her lunch, her legs swinging freely several inches above the floor. The 98 lawyers who had spent countless hours meticulously examining the contract stared in various states of shock, confusion, and barely concealed outrage. "Marcus, this is absolutely insane," Patricia Hayes whispered urgently, leaning close to his ear. "You're asking us to present a $789 million merger contract to an 8-year-old child who probably still believes in Santa Claus." She's exceptionally mature for her age," Marcus corrected quietly, "and sometimes completely fresh eyes can see exactly what experienced ones have become blind to through years of conventional thinking." Dr. Richardson from Harvard Law School cleared his throat pompously, his voice dripping with condescension. "With all due respect, Mr. Wellington, this little girl doesn't possess a law degree from any accredited institution. She can barely read at an adult comprehension level, let alone understand complex legal terminology." Emma's cheeks flushed bright red, but she lifted her chin defiantly with a courage that impressed everyone in the room. "I can read perfectly fine, thank you very much, and I understand more than you think." Marcus placed a gentle, encouraging hand on her shoulder. "Emma, these highly educated lawyers have been working on this contract for several days straight. They can't find anything wrong with it, but I have a very strong feeling there might be something important they've overlooked. Would you like to take a careful look?" Emma nodded solemnly, her expression serious beyond her years. Mrs. Patterson, who had absolutely insisted on accompanying her exceptional student to this unprecedented meeting, squeezed her hand encouragingly. Marcus placed the first page of the densely typed contract directly in front of Emma. The assembled lawyers watched with barely concealed skepticism and growing impatience as the 8-year-old girl began to read with intense concentration, her small finger tracing along each line as she absorbed the complex legal language. "What's this complicated word mean?" Emma pointed to a particularly dense paragraph filled with legal jargon. "Indemnification," Patricia explained in a condescending tone, "typically reserved for very small children. It means legal protection from financial responsibility or liability." Emma frowned deeply, her brow furrowing with the intense concentration Mrs. Patterson had observed so many times during challenging math problems. "But why does it say party of the first part in this sentence and first party in this completely different section? Aren't they supposed to mean exactly the same thing?" The lawyers exchanged dismissive glances, their patience wearing thin. "They are identical," Dr. Richardson said with obvious irritation. "It's simply different acceptable legal phrasing for the same entity." But Emma shook her head slowly, that same expression of laser-focused intensity that had amazed her teachers since kindergarten taking over her features. "No, that's not right at all. Look carefully here." She pointed to 2 different paragraphs with her small finger. This section clearly states, party of the first part assumes complete liability, but this other section explicitly says first party is totally exempt from liability. If they're supposed to mean the exact same person or company, then this creates a direct contradiction. The massive room fell into complete, stunned silence. Patricia Hayes leaned over the contract, her face suddenly draining of all color. "Dear God," she whispered in absolute amazement, "she's absolutely right." The revelation hit the conference room like a lightning bolt, sending shockwaves through every corner of the space. Patricia Hayes frantically grabbed her reading glasses, her hands trembling as she examined the contract sections Emma had identified. Dr. Richardson's pompous expression crumbled into one of horror as the implications began to sink in like poison through his veins. "This is impossible," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "How did 98 legal professionals miss something so fundamental?" Marcus felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he watched the lawyers scramble through the documents. Emma sat quietly in her oversized chair, swinging her legs patiently, while the adults around her descended into controlled chaos. "Mrs." Patterson squeezed the little girl's hand protectively, amazed at how calmly Emma was handling this monumentally stressful situation. "Emma," Marcus said gently, kneeling beside her chair so they were at eye level, "can you explain exactly what you're seeing that's different?" Emma's dark eyes sparkled with the excitement of solving a puzzle. "It's like my teacher always says about word problems in math. You have to read every single word carefully, not just the big ones. Look here." She pointed with her small finger to the first paragraph. "It says party of the first part. That's Wellington Industries, right? And it says you have to pay for everything if something goes wrong." The lawyers nodded grimly, following her logic with growing dread. "But down here," Emma continued, flipping several pages with surprising confidence, "it says first party is exempt from liability. If first party means the same thing as party of the first part, then the contract is saying you have to pay for everything, and you don't have to pay for anything. That's silly, right?" Patricia Hayes was now frantically typing on her laptop, cross-referencing legal databases. "She's absolutely correct. According to legal precedent, party of the first part and first party can be interpreted as separate entities if the contract doesn't explicitly define them as identical. This creates what we call a definitional ambiguity." Dr. Richardson was turning an alarming shade of red. "But surely no court would accept such a technicality over a clear intent to—" "Actually," interrupted James Morrison, the youngest lawyer in the room, who had been quietly researching on his phone, "there's a landmark case from 1987, Henderson versus Blackstone Corporation, where similar ambiguous language voided a major merger. The court ruled that when billion-dollar contracts contain definitional inconsistencies, the benefit of the doubt goes to the party that didn't draft the agreement." The room erupted into excited chatter as lawyers began making frantic phone calls. But Marcus's attention remained focused on Emma, who was now carefully examining another section of the contract with the same methodical precision. "Mr. Marcus," Emma said quietly, tugging on his sleeve, "there's something else here that looks funny." Emma's innocent observation sent another wave of electricity through the room. Marcus immediately sat down beside her, his full attention focused on this remarkable 8-year-old who was single-handedly dismantling what everyone had considered an ironclad contract. "What else do you see, Emma?" he asked, his voice filled with growing respect and amazement. Emma flipped through several more pages, her finger tracing along lines of dense legal text that would intimidate most adults. "This part here talks about transfer of assets within 30 business days, but this other part says completion of transfer within 30 calendar days. Those aren't the same thing, are they?" Patricia Hayes dropped her pen, her face going pale. "Dear God, she's found another discrepancy. Business days exclude weekends and holidays, while calendar days include everything. That's potentially a difference of several weeks, which in a merger of this magnitude could mean billions in penalties and interest." Marcus finished, his voice filled with awe. "Emma, you're absolutely brilliant." But Emma wasn't finished. Her 8-year-old mind was working with laser-like focus, spotting patterns and inconsistencies that legal experts had completely overlooked. And look at this part, about the executive retention bonus. It says Mr. Blackstone gets $50 million for staying as CEO, but then it says all executive positions are eliminated after the merger. How can he be CEO if there's no CEO position? The lawyers were now frantically taking notes, their earlier skepticism completely replaced by stunned admiration. Dr. Richardson had gone completely quiet, staring at Emma as if she was some kind of supernatural phenomenon. Marcus felt tears welling in his eyes as he watched this extraordinary little girl, who had been sitting in an empty classroom just hours ago, waiting for her overworked mother, systematically destroying a contract that would have cost him everything his family had built. "Emma," he said softly, "do you understand what you've just done?" Emma looked up at him with those wise, dark eyes that seemed far too mature for her young face. "I helped you find the mistakes so you don't have to make a bad deal?" "You did so much more than that," Marcus whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved everything my grandfather worked for his entire life. You saved Wellington Industries. You saved hundreds of jobs. You saved everything." But Emma's attention had already returned to the contract, her natural curiosity driving her to continue reading. "Mr. Marcus, what does intellectual property rights reversion clause mean? Because it says two different things here." Mrs. Patterson watched in amazement as Emma continued to work, completely absorbed in her task. She had always known this child was special, but seeing her in action was breathtaking. This wasn't just intelligence, this was a gift that could change lives. Meanwhile, Patricia Hayes was already on the phone with Wellington Industries' board of directors, explaining that the Blackstone merger was not only voidable, but could potentially result in massive penalties against Blackstone Corporation for drafting such a flawed document. Marcus realized that in a matter of hours, his entire life had been transformed by a little girl who noticed things others missed. But more than that, he was beginning to see an opportunity to transform her life in return. "Emma," he said quietly, "how would you like to learn everything there is to know about being a lawyer?" The next morning, Marcus arrived at Lincoln Elementary School with a determination that reminded him of his grandfather's legendary business focus. He had spent the entire night working with his lawyers to not only void the Blackstone merger, but to turn Emma's discoveries into a counter-lawsuit that could recover damages for Wellington Industries. But more importantly, he had been developing a plan that would change Emma Rodriguez's life forever. Principal Johnson met him in her office, this time with considerably more respect and attention than their first meeting. Word had already spread through the school district about what had happened in that Manhattan boardroom, and the principal was struggling to process the magnitude of what one of her students had accomplished. "Mr. Wellington, I have to admit, when you came here yesterday, I thought you were either desperate or delusional. Now I'm beginning to realize that Emma Rodriguez might be one of the most gifted children I've ever encountered in 23 years of education." Marcus nodded, his eyes bright with excitement. "That's exactly why I'm here, Principal Johnson. I want to discuss Emma's future, her education, her potential, and how we can nurture this extraordinary gift she possesses." Mrs. Patterson joined them, having been summoned from her classroom, where she was still trying to explain to her other students why Emma had been called away to help solve a very important grown-up problem. "Emma's always been special," Mrs. Patterson said, settling into her chair. "But what she did yesterday, I've never seen anything like it. The way she could cut through all that complex legal language and see the essential problems that trained professionals had missed, it's remarkable." "I've been thinking about this all night," Marcus continued, leaning forward with intensity. "Emma doesn't just have a gift for spotting inconsistencies. She has a natural legal mind that, with proper training and education, could make her one of the most brilliant lawyers of her generation. but she needs opportunities that her current circumstances simply cannot provide. Principal Johnson raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you proposing? EA, a complete educational scholarship, starting immediately, private tutoring to accelerate her learning, enrollment in the city's most prestigious preparatory academy starting next year, college preparation programs, and ultimately, a full ride to any law school in the country. But more than that, I want to mentor her personally, to show her the real world of business and law, to help her understand how her gift can be used to help people. Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Wellington, that's incredibly generous, but Emma's mother works 3 jobs just to survive. I'm not sure Maria would be comfortable accepting such an enormous gift from a stranger. That's why I want to meet with Maria tonight, Marcus replied. I want her to understand that this isn't charity. It's an investment in an extraordinary mind. Emma has already proven she can solve problems that teams of experts cannot. Imagine what she could accomplish with proper training and education. Just then, the classroom door burst open, and Emma herself appeared, her backpack bouncing as she ran toward them with the breathless excitement of a child who has just made an incredible discovery. "Mrs. Patterson! Mr. Marcus!" she called out, her voice echoing in the small office. "I was thinking about that contract all night, and I remembered something else." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "What is it, Emma?" Emma pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her backpack, notes she had apparently been taking during their meeting the previous day. "I wrote down some of the big words to look up later, and I found something really important. That word indemnification that the lady lawyer explained. I looked it up in the library computer this morning, and it has a special legal meaning that's different from just protection." Patricia Hayes, who had arrived at the school to discuss the ongoing legal implications, stepped forward with interest. "What did you find, Emma?" "The definition said that indemnification can only apply to actions taken in good faith," Emma explained, her 8-year-old voice carrying surprising authority. "But if Mr. Blackstone was trying to trick Mr. Marcus with a confusing contract, then that's not good faith, right? So the indemnification part wouldn't work anyway, even if the contract was right." The adults in the room exchanged amazed glances. Patricia Hayes was already reaching for her phone to call her research team. "Emma," Marcus said softly, kneeling down to her level, "you just identified what we lawyers call bad faith negotiation, which could invalidate the entire agreement and open Blackstone up to fraud charges." Emma beamed with pride, but then her expression grew thoughtful. "Mr. Marcus, why did all those smart lawyers miss these things? Don't they know how to read carefully?" It was Mrs. Patterson who answered, her voice filled with gentle wisdom. "Sometimes, Emma, when people become experts at something, they start seeing only what they expect to see. But you looked at everything with fresh eyes and an honest heart. That's a very special gift." Marcus realized that Emma had just asked the most important question of all, and her mother deserved to hear the answer directly from him. That evening, Marcus sat in the same corner booth at Angelo's all-night diner, where he had first learned about Emma's existence just 2 days earlier. The familiar yellow light felt warm and welcoming as he waited nervously for Maria Rodriguez to finish her shift. In his briefcase were documents that could change the Rodriguez family's life forever. But he knew that presenting them properly would require delicacy and genuine respect for a mother's protective instincts. Maria approached his table at exactly 11:30 p.m., her face showing the exhaustion of another grueling day, but also curiosity about this mysterious, wealthy man who had taken such an interest in her daughter. "Mr. Wellington," she said quietly, sliding into the booth across from him. "Emma has been talking non-stop about yesterday. She says she helped you with some kind of important business problem." Marcus smiled, remembering Emma's animated recounting of the day's events. "Maria, your daughter didn't just help me. She saved my entire company. She spotted critical errors in a legal contract that 98 professional lawyers had missed completely." Maria's eyes widened with a mixture of pride and disbelief. "But she's only 8 years old." How could she? Because she has an extraordinary gift, Marcus interrupted gently. Maria, I need you to understand something very important. What Emma did yesterday wasn't just impressive for a child, it was impressive for anyone. She has a natural legal mind that could take her anywhere she wants to go in life. He opened his briefcase and carefully removed a folder of documents. I want to offer Emma a complete educational scholarship. The best private schools, college preparation, law school, everything she needs to develop her potential to its fullest. Maria stared at the papers with a mixture of hope and fear. Mr. Wellington, I appreciate your gratitude, but I can't accept charity. Emma and I, we make our own way in this world. This isn't charity, Marcus said firmly. This is an investment in an exceptional mind. Maria, Emma has already proven she can solve problems that teams of experts cannot. Yesterday, she didn't just find mistakes, she saved Wellington Industries from bankruptcy and helped us recover millions in damages from a fraudulent contract. He leaned forward, his voice filled with sincerity. But more than that, I want to be Emma's mentor. I want to show her the world of business and law, help her understand how her gift can be used to help other people. My grandfather mentored me the same way, and it made all the difference in my life. Maria was quiet for a long moment, studying the scholarship documents with careful attention. Finally, she looked up with tears in her eyes. What would this mean for Emma? Would she still be my little girl? Always, Marcus assured her. The best school in the city is only 15 minutes from here. She would come home to you every night. The only difference would be that during the day, instead of struggling in an underfunded public school, she would be learning from the best teachers money can provide. And what do you want in return? Maria asked, her maternal instincts still alert for any hidden agenda. Marcus smiled. I want to watch Emma become everything she's capable of becoming. I want to see her use her gift to help other families like yours, to fight for people who can't afford teams of expensive lawyers. I want her to have every opportunity I had, plus the natural talent I could never possess. Maria was silent again, but Marcus could see the internal struggle in her expression. Finally, she spoke. Emma's teacher, Mrs. Patterson, she says Emma has dreams of being a lawyer, big dreams for such a little girl. They don't have to stay dreams, Marcus said quietly. With the right education and guidance, Emma could become one of the most important legal minds of her generation. But the choice is yours, Maria. I will never pressure you, and this offer remains open regardless of your decision. Maria wiped away a tear. Can I think about it? Can I talk to Emma? Of course. Take all the time you need. But as Maria gathered the documents to take home, Marcus sensed that something had already changed. Hope had entered her world, and hope, he knew from his grandfather's teachings, was the most powerful force in the universe. What neither of them realized was that Emma was at home, wide awake in her small bedroom, using her mother's old laptop to research more about contracts and law, driven by a curiosity that simply wouldn't let her rest. The little girl who had accidentally saved a billion-dollar company was just getting started. 3 weeks later, Emma Rodriguez walked through the imposing marble hallways of Whitmore Preparatory Academy in her new school uniform, carrying herself with the quiet confidence that had amazed everyone she'd encountered. The transition from Lincoln Elementary had been challenging, but Emma's remarkable mind had adapted to the accelerated curriculum with the same natural ability that had allowed her to dissect complex legal documents. Marcus visited the school twice a week, not as a benefactor checking on his investment, but as a mentor genuinely invested in Emma's development. Today, he found her in the school's law library, a resource that would have been unimaginable at her previous school, working through a junior-level textbook on contract law with the focus of a graduate student. "How are you adjusting, Emma?" Marcus asked, settling into the chair beside her. Emma looked up with those intelligent dark eyes that had first captured his attention. "It's hard sometimes. The other kids don't understand why I'm interested in boring things like laws and contracts. But I love learning about how the legal system works to protect people. That's exactly how I felt when I first started learning about business, Marcus assured her. Being different isn't easy, but being exceptional never is. Emma nodded thoughtfully, then brightened with excitement. Mr. Marcus, I've been thinking about something. Remember how you said that Emma spotted those contract problems because she looked with fresh eyes? Yes. Well, what if there are other companies with bad contracts that they don't know about? What if we could help them before they get in trouble? Marcus felt a surge of pride and amazement. Even at 8 years old, Emma was thinking not just about her own success, but about how her gift could serve others. That's a brilliant idea, Emma. What are you thinking? Emma pulled out a notebook filled with her careful handwriting. I've been researching famous contract disputes, and I noticed patterns. Companies make the same kinds of mistakes over and over. What if we created a checklist of things to look for? We could help small businesses avoid the traps that almost caught Wellington Industries. Marcus stared at her notebook, filled with observations that demonstrated legal insight far beyond her years. Emma, what you're describing is essentially a legal consulting service. That's incredibly sophisticated thinking. Could we really do that? Emma's face lit up with excitement. Not yet, Marcus said gently. You need years more education and training. But someday, when you're older and have your law degree, there's no limit to what you could accomplish. Just then, Mrs. Patterson appeared in the library doorway. She had been visiting Whitmore to see how Emma was adjusting to her new environment, and the sight of her former student engaged in such advanced work filled her with emotions she could barely contain. Emma, sweetheart, how are you doing? Emma jumped up to hug her beloved teacher. Mrs. Patterson, I'm learning so much. Did you know that there are entire books just about how to read contracts properly? And Mr. Marcus says that someday I might be able to help families like mine avoid legal problems. Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears as she looked from Emma to Marcus. You know, when I first told Emma she could become a lawyer, I believed it was possible. But seeing her now, she's not just going to become a lawyer, she's going to revolutionize how legal services reach ordinary people. Marcus nodded, struck by the truth of that observation. Emma has a gift for making complex things simple and accessible. That's exactly what the legal profession needs. Emma was already back at her textbook, completely absorbed in a chapter about consumer protection laws. Mr. Marcus, what does unconscionable contract terms mean? As Marcus began to explain another complex legal concept to his eager student, he realized that his grandfather's greatest lesson was proving true once again. When you invest in exceptional people and give them opportunities to grow, they don't just change their own lives, they change the world. But more than that, Emma was changing him. Her passion for using her gift to help others was inspiring Marcus to think beyond just running Wellington Industries. Perhaps it was time to consider how his resources and Emma's extraordinary mind could work together to create something entirely new. The little girl who had saved his company was about to inspire him to build something even greater. 5 years later, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation as 13-year-old Emma Rodriguez, now a high school senior through Whitmore Academy's accelerated program, sat at the plaintiff's table beside Marcus Wellington and their legal team. The case that had brought them here was unprecedented. Rodriguez versus Predatory Lending Corp., a class-action lawsuit representing thousands of families who had been trapped by intentionally deceptive contracts. Emma had identified the predatory patterns while reviewing materials for her advanced legal studies internship at Wellington Industries. What started as an academic exercise had evolved into the largest consumer protection case in state history, with Emma serving as both the inspiration for the lawsuit and a consulting expert despite her young age. Your Honor, Marcus addressed the court, his voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned that justice often comes through the most unexpected channels. 5 years ago, an 8-year-old girl saved my company by spotting contract flaws that 98 professional lawyers had missed. Today, That same brilliant mind, now 13 and already completing college-level legal studies, has identified systematic fraud that has stolen millions from working families. Emma sat quietly, her notebook filled with detailed analyses of the deceptive contract language that had ensnared so many families like her own. She had grown taller, but those same intelligent dark eyes that had amazed everyone 5 years earlier now burned with passionate determination to use her gift for justice. The opposing counsel, representing the lending company, looked uncomfortable as they faced not just a team of expensive lawyers, but a teenager whose analytical mind had exposed years of carefully hidden fraud. Judge Harrison leaned forward with interest. "Ms. Rodriguez, I understand you played a crucial role in identifying the deceptive practices at the heart of this case." Emma stood with the poise of someone far beyond her 13 years. "Yes, Your Honor, I've been studying contract law since I was 8, and I noticed that this company uses identical deceptive patterns in thousands of agreements. They deliberately create confusion between similar terms to hide the real costs from borrowers." She opened her presentation folder, revealing charts and analysis that demonstrated systematic fraud across thousands of contracts. They use party of the first part and first party to create deliberate ambiguity, just like the Blackstone contract that started my legal education. But this time, they're not targeting billion-dollar companies. They're targeting families who can't afford legal representation. Marcus watched with pride as Emma presented her findings with the clarity and authority of a seasoned attorney. Maria Rodriguez, now working as a paralegal at Wellington Industries after completing her own legal education with Marcus's support, wiped away tears as she watched her daughter advocate for justice. The judge studied Emma's analysis for several minutes before looking up with amazement. "Ms. Rodriguez, in 30 years on the bench, I have never seen such thorough and insightful contract analysis from someone so young. Your work here represents the highest ideals of the legal profession." By the end of the day, Predatory Lending Corp had agreed to a settlement that would return over $50 million to defrauded families and establish new consumer protection standards. But for Emma, the victory was about more than money. After the court session, Marcus found Emma on the courthouse steps, staring up at the Statue of Justice with her scales and blindfold. "How do you feel?" he asked quietly. Emma smiled, the same bright expression that had lit up the Lincoln Elementary Library years earlier. "I feel like I'm finally doing what I'm supposed to do. Using my gift to help families like mine was 5 years ago." Marcus nodded, his heart full of pride and gratitude. "Your grandfather would be proud too, Emma. You've learned his greatest lesson. True success comes from using your gifts to lift others up." "What's next?" Emma asked, her mind already racing with possibilities. Marcus laughed, remembering the 8-year-old girl who had saved his empire and inadvertently revealed her own destiny. "Whatever you want, Emma. You've already changed more lives than most lawyers do in entire careers, and you're just getting started." As they walked away from the courthouse together, Emma pulled out her ever-present notebook and began sketching ideas for their next project, a legal aid clinic that would provide free contract review services for low-income families, staffed by law students and guided by the principle that everyone deserved protection from predatory practices. The little girl who had once waited alone in empty classrooms was now surrounded by possibilities, armed with knowledge and driven by an unshakable commitment to justice. Her journey from poverty to prominence had proven that extraordinary gifts, when nurtured with love and opportunity, can transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And Marcus Wellington, the young billionaire who had almost lost everything, had gained something far more valuable: the knowledge that true wealth comes from investing in others and watching them soar beyond every limitation the world tries to impose. Emma Rodriguez was no longer just the little legal genius who saved a company. She was a force for justice whose greatest victories still lay ahead.